What do you think of when you think about play? Is it something as simple as letting sand trickle through your fingers? Or is it something more complex, like a game of Dungeons and Dragons where you're creating strange, crazy worlds in your heads and trying to build ways around problems which wouldn't exist in your normal world? Does it involve little girls playing dolls or boys playing with trucks and bulldozers? Most importantly, where does it happen? Play is among the most fundamental activities that living beings engage in. It can be observed throughout the entire animal kingdom, but particularly we see it in mammals, ranging from mice to monkeys, dogs to dugongs, horses to humans. The question is why? What play is, exactly, is highly debated. Pellegrini bemoans that there are as many definitions of play as there are researchers who are exploring it at the moment. It's influenced especially by the social context and cultural background in which the research occurs. Burke, for instance, suggests that the contextualization of play should be as a keystone to childhood development, in which children foster imaginatively based frameworks to understand the world around them. So, for instance, this could be playing occupation-based games, such as teachers or policed. Or it could be playing fantasy-based scenarios out, such as dragons, ponies, knights and wizards. Now, these games can occur with or without props depending on the environment. They can have a high level of improvisation to the play scenario and to the way the play environment is transformed within the constructed narrative the children are creating. By contrast, government documents such as the Early Years Learning Framework, however, define play as the majority of what young children do, apart from specific work-based chores, such as setting the table or emptying the dishwasher. So, for instance, this could mean that eating a meal in a funny way could be considered play under this framework. Perhaps the best definition comes from Burkhardt. Play is the repeated, seemingly non-functional behaviour differing from more adaptive versions structurally, contextually, or developmentally, and initiated when the animal or person is in a relaxed, unstimulating, or low-stress setting. In play, an individual can contextualize themselves in dozens of different ways. Physically, they learn how to adjust for growing limbs, strengthening muscles, and the way the laws of physics will pull them back down to earth. Emotionally, they learn how to cope with fear, boredom, anger, disgust, and sadness, as well as joy, happiness, curiosity, and occasionally bouts of uncontrollable laughter. Socially, children learn through play where they fit into the world. They learn the rules of how to interact with others, and how society as a whole will support them or reject them depending on the behaviour they exhibit. Of particular note in just how fundamental play is, Isabel Beckman studies the bonobo needs and shows how, when play is allowed to drive a community, such as it does with the bonobos, negative traits such as anger, aggression, and resentment are significantly reduced. Compared to chimpanzees, who have much lower lifetime incidences of play, the bonobos appear socially more stable, happier, and are far more likely to work collaboratively to the benefit of their community. In humans, just as with bonobos, social skills are predominantly gained and refined in play situations. The non-threatening environment allows the individual to test and understand the boundaries of what is socially acceptable, and to experiment with communal roles which may not usually be open to them, such as a 5-year-old pretending to be a doctor. Motor skills such as balancing, climbing, running, jumping, and swinging are all developed in play with a physical element, which dominates much of a child's early developmental play. Especially as children experience growth spurts, these experiences where they can figure out what's happening with their bodies are exceptionally important. Cognitively, problem-solving skills, negotiation tactics, pattern recognition, and literary undertakings are all involved in the creation of the narrative of play. As children get older, these become increasingly more complex, and, as people move into adulthood, still pose opportunities for the individual to rebalance their skills. Where is this play happening? Once upon a time, play was happening everywhere, from the backyard, along the streets, to the local parks and shops, and out into the bush. Today, this does not occur so much. Play has become predominantly confined to backyards, or to highly engineered and fenced parks, and, under parental escort, straight to friends' yards. Many of the spaces children were once considered to have a right to access have now been deemed unsafe and inaccessible. Going from Burkhart's definition of play as something which occurs in spaces of low threat, this change in contextualization has some major implications for how children can interact with their environment. Parents, of course, do play a major role in how play is contextualized. One thing which must be made abundantly clear is in no way, shape or form is this recontextualization remotely malicious in its intent. Parents are, for all intents and purposes, the biggest influences upon their children's lives. Not only are they their children's first teachers, role models, loves, hates and companions, but parents are the ones who set the boundaries upon which children can play, and under what circumstances this play is allowed to occur. Whilst it is most definitely reasonable to closely monitor a toddler's play, by middle childhood, about 6 to 13 years old, where these boundaries are set becomes much more contentious. Whilst a single generation ago, these children would take on increasing responsibility and freedom in determining their own play away from direct adult supervision, and slowly begin to move away from the immediate home environment. Current societal pressures and even governmental policies are rejecting the concept of allowing children the ability to exist without the direct influence of their parents or immediate guardians, and as such, their ability to play. So, what changed? Many sociologists suggest it was a trifecta of events. The rise of the 24-hour global news cycle and digital media, which led to stories of kidnappings and children coming to harm becoming far more commonplace in the media than was statistically representative of the crime rates in a family's local community. The rise in the cost of living made it difficult for families to justify having a parent at home for the children. This reduced network of parents keeping an eye on children, even if surreptitiously, within the community, and the risk of litigation, has made the burden of allowing children to go to play an unacceptable risk to families. And finally, 9/11. And finally, we've got to consider 9/11. Whilst here in Australia the effects were not felt nearly as deeply as in the United States, it still brought a sense of danger and uncertainty that hadn't existed before into the community. And for parents, this fear realised itself in the restriction of play for their children. All of these factors have led to a massive sense of insecurity among parents, a disillusion of the social bonds compared to previous generations, and a social stigma on children having independent access to spaces where once they would have been welcomed on their own terms. So, what does this mean? Adults and children playing, or playing under direct adult supervision, can be beneficial. For adults, it's a chance for them to recontextualise themselves within the societal structures on the micro level. It allows them to reduce their own stress levels and connect more deeply with the children within their sphere than everyday activities may normally allow. For children, the modelling behaviours demonstrated by adults during adult-child collaborative play results in acquisition of new, demonstrated skills, understanding of social conventions, and the reinforcement of socially accepted values and customs. However, when children are given the opportunity to play independently, they have the chance to gain a sense of self-worth, resilience, and social connections beyond what can be provided within the family sphere. The familiar idiosyncrasies or biases in behaviour may be corrected by peers. Peer learning offers children the chance to problem solve, move and interact without accounting for generational differences. For parents themselves, they learn to trust in their children's abilities, something which is especially important for girls who already face a social bias of incompetency when it comes especially to their motor skills and undertaking risk-taking behaviours. So where to from here? The questions which we need to ask. Where specifically do parents feel comfortable enough to allow their children to play now? What are the main factors parents identify as determining their attitudes towards how they direct and influence their children's play? How were they playing when they were children? How do they think it's changed? And do they believe it's right? And finally, how does their own play as children complicate or mitigate the restrictions that they then place on their own kids?